While I was screaming in labor, pushing out what I thought was our daughter, my husband Milo was on one knee in his office, proposing to his secretary with a ring he'd bought using our baby's college fund. What he didn't know? The paternity test I'd secretly ordered would prove the baby wasn't his, and neither was the one his secretary was carrying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sometimes the truth delivers itself. Let me take you back to March 15th, the day that should have been the happiest of my life. I'm Dorothy, and after 9 months of pregnancy, 36 hours of labor, and every ounce of strength I had left, I was finally holding my daughter Grace, named after my grandmother who'd raised me. But Milo wasn't there. My husband of 4 years, the man who'd promised to be by my side through everything, was supposedly stuck in an emergency board meeting that couldn't wait. Even for the birth of his first child. The nurses kept asking where my husband was. My mother flew in from Portland and kept checking her phone, texting him updates he never responded to. And there I was, holding this perfect little human being, taking those first precious photos alone because the one person who should have been there was handling a crisis at the company. I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. Milo worked as the chief operations officer at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, a mid-sized advertising firm downtown. He'd been there for 6 years, working his way up from account manager to the C-suite. It was good money, demanding hours, and I'd grown accustomed to him missing dinners, weekend plans, even our anniversary last year because of client emergencies. His secretary, Bree, had started about 18 months ago. 26 years old, fresh out of business school, ambitious and beautiful in that effortless way that made me feel frumpy, even before pregnancy weight. Milo always spoke highly of her work ethic, how she stayed late to help him with presentations, how she anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. "She's invaluable," he'd say. "I don't know how I managed without her." Turns out he'd been managing her in ways I never imagined. The signs were there during my pregnancy, but I attributed them to stress about becoming a father. Milo became distant around my 5th month, less interested in feeling the baby kick, fewer questions about nursery colors or name choices. When I'd try to discuss our birth plan, he'd change the subject, or suddenly remember urgent work he had to finish. The late nights became later. "Bree and I are working on the Henderson campaign," became his standard explanation. The Henderson campaign that somehow required dinner meetings, weekend strategy sessions, and overnight trips to scout locations that never seemed to produce any actual advertising materials I could see. But the biggest red flag? He started password protecting his phone. After 4 years of marriage where we'd casually used each other's devices, suddenly his phone was locked tighter than Fort Knox. When a man starts hiding his phone from his pregnant wife, ladies, that's not about work confidentiality. My contractions started at 2 a.m. on March 14th. By 6 a.m., they were 5 minutes apart, and I was gripping the bathroom counter, breathing through waves of pain that felt like my body was being split in half. "Milo," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "It's time. We need to go to the hospital." He bolted, upright, looked at his phone, which had been buzzing with notifications, and his face went pale, not with excitement about meeting our daughter, but with what looked like panic. "Are you sure?" he asked, already reaching for his phone again. "Maybe it's false labor? First babies usually take forever, right?" My water broke 20 minutes later, soaking through the mattress, and he was still on his phone, typing frantically. When I asked who he was texting at 6:30 in the morning about our baby being born, he said, "Just letting work know I might not be in today." Might not be in. For the birth of his first child. We got to Riverside General Hospital at 7:15 a.m. By noon, I was in active labor, gripping the bed rails and begging for an epidural. Milo paced the room like a caged animal, checking his phone every 30 seconds. At 2 p.m., his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and I swear I saw relief wash over his face. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the hallway while I was in the middle of a contraction that felt like it was ripping me apart. He came back 10 minutes later with a face full of manufactured concern. "Dorothy, honey, there's a massive crisis at work. The Henderson campaign presentation is this afternoon, and if we don't nail it, we could lose the account. That's 12 jobs, including mine potentially." I was dilated to 8 centimeters, sweating through a hospital gown, about to bring his child into the world, and he was worried about a PowerPoint presentation. "I'll be back before the baby comes," he promised, kissing my forehead while I was mid-contraction. "Bree's handling most of it, but I need to be there for the client meeting. You understand, right?" Grace was born at 4:47 p.m. Beautiful, perfect, 10 fingers and 10 toes, with the tiniest cry that filled the delivery room with joy. Milo walked back into that room at 8:30 p.m., 4 hours later, smelling like champagne and wearing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's when I knew. In that moment, holding our daughter while he made excuses about celebrating landing the Henderson account, I knew my marriage was built on lies. I just didn't know how deep those lies went. But I was about to find out. And when I did, the truth would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and even my own daughter. The next few weeks would bring discoveries that would make Milo's absence during labor look like a minor betrayal. Evidence would surface that would reveal not just an affair, but a deception so elaborate and cruel that it would take months to unravel. Because while I was in that delivery room, fighting to bring new life into the world, Milo wasn't just missing the birth of his daughter. He was across town, creating an entirely different future with someone else, using money meant for our child, making promises he'd already broken to me, and living a double life that would soon collapse under the weight of scientific truth. The paternity test was supposed to be routine, just paperwork for our insurance. What it revealed would destroy 2 families and expose lies that went back further than I ever imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about the phone call that changed everything. The one that came exactly 3 weeks after Grace was born, when I was still healing from childbirth and Milo was working even later than before. Because sometimes the most devastating truths come from the most unexpected sources. 3 weeks after Grace was born, I was finally starting to feel human again. The postpartum bleeding had stopped, my incision was healing, and I'd managed to establish something resembling a feeding schedule. Milo had taken exactly 2 days off after Grace's birth before diving back into work with renewed intensity, claiming, "The Henderson account success had opened doors to 3 new major clients." I was folding tiny pink onesies in the nursery when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Dorothy Martinez?" The voice was professional, female, slightly hesitant. "Yes, this is Dorothy. My name is Edith Walsh. I'm a pediatric nurse at Riverside General. I was working the day your daughter was born." My stomach clenched. Had something gone wrong with Grace's tests? Some delayed complication from her birth? Is everything okay? Is there a problem with my daughter? No. No, your daughter is fine. This is about something else entirely. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you a strange question. Did your husband leave the hospital on March 15th during your labor?" The question hit me like ice water. "Yes, he did. There was an emergency at work. Why are you asking?" There was a long pause. "Mrs. Martinez, I think we need to meet in person. There's something you need to know about that day, and I can't discuss it over the phone." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, Grace sleeping peacefully in her carrier, while Edith Walsh, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, stirred her latte nervously. "I've been debating whether to make this call for 3 weeks," she began. "But I keep thinking about you, alone in that delivery room, asking where your husband was. What do you know about where he was? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Edith pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was taken from what looked like a restaurant window. A picture of Milo on one knee in front of a woman with shoulder-length blonde hair. The woman's face wasn't visible, but her hands were pressed to her mouth in apparent surprise. My daughter works at Bellacourt, that upscale Italian place on 5th Street. She sent me this photo around 4 p.m. on March 15th, with a caption about witnessing the most romantic proposal. When I saw it, I recognized your husband immediately from when he finally showed up at the hospital. My hands began to shake. This was taken while I was in labor? According to the timestamp, this was taken at 4:23 p.m. Your daughter was born at 4:47 p.m. 24 minutes. While I was pushing Grace into the world, Milo was proposing to another woman 24 minutes away. Do you know who the woman is? Edith shook her head. My daughter didn't recognize her. But Dorothy, there's more. The restaurant staff was talking about it because the man had reserved their private dining room weeks in advance. This wasn't a spontaneous proposal. This was planned. That night, after Milo came home late claiming he'd been putting out fires with the new accounts, I waited until he was in the shower before going through his wallet. My hands trembled as I searched through credit card receipts, business cards, and cash. There it was. Bellacourt Restaurant, March 15th, 4:15 p.m. $347.82. The charge was for private dining experience proposal package. I photographed the receipt with shaking hands, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. $700. On the day our daughter was born, Milo had spent $700 on a proposal dinner for another woman. But that wasn't the most damning part. At the bottom of the receipt, in the restaurant's elegant script, was a note. Congratulations. Ring pickup confirmed for 3:30 p.m. Ring pickup. He'd bought an engagement ring and picked it up 30 minutes before proposing to someone else while I was giving birth to what I believed was his child. I sat on our bathroom floor, Grace sleeping in the bassinet beside me, staring at that receipt until the numbers blurred through my tears. 4 years of marriage, 9 months of pregnancy, 36 hours of labor, and he'd been planning this betrayal for weeks. The next morning, while Milo was at work and Grace napped, I did something I'd never done in our 4 years of marriage. I logged into our joint bank account and started investigating our finances. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 3 months, my entire 3rd trimester, there had been regular withdrawals and transfers I couldn't account for. $2,000 in February to Sterling Jewelers, $2,500 in January to something called Romantic Getaways, Inc., multiple charges to high-end restaurants on days when Milo claimed to be working late. But the most devastating discovery was a separate savings account I'd never seen before. An account titled M&B Future Fund with a balance of $23,000. Money that had been systematically transferred from our joint savings, the account we'd been building for Grace's college fund, for our future, for the life we were supposed to be building together. M&B, Milo and Bree? I downloaded every bank statement from the past year, printed them out, and spread them across our dining room table like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for. The transfers had started small in October. $200 here, $500 there. But as my pregnancy progressed, they'd grown larger and more frequent. In my 9th month, while I was swollen and uncomfortable and preparing for our daughter's arrival, Milo had transferred $8,000 to the M&B account. Our daughter's college fund had been systematically pillaged to finance his new life with his secretary. That evening, Milo's phone rang during dinner. He glanced at it, declined the call, and placed it face down on the table. Work? I asked casually, feeding Grace her bottle. Yeah, probably Bree with questions about tomorrow's client presentation. She calls you at home a lot. She's new to handling major accounts, needs guidance. His phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then another. Each buzz made him more visibly agitated. "Maybe you should answer it," I suggested. "Sounds urgent." "It can wait until morning." But 20 minutes later, when Grace started crying and I went to change her diaper, I heard him in the kitchen, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Can't talk right now?" "Yes, I know what day it is." "No, she doesn't suspect anything. I said I'd call you back." When I returned to the kitchen, he was washing dishes with unusual intensity. "Everything okay?" "Fine. Just work stress." But his hands were shaking as he dried the plates. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks earlier. I carefully lifted his phone from the nightstand and tried to unlock it. The passcode had been changed. Again. This was the 3rd time since Grace was born. But muscle memory betrayed him. As I watched him unlock it the next morning, I caught the pattern. 0315, March 15th, the day Grace was born, the day he proposed to someone else. I memorized those numbers and waited for my opportunity. 2 days later, that opportunity came. Milo was in the shower, and his phone was charging on the kitchen counter when it lit up with an incoming text. The preview was enough to stop my heart. "Bree, can't wait to see you tonight. 3 weeks feels like forever. Still can't believe you're going to be a daddy." A daddy. Bree was pregnant. And from the tone of the message, Milo was the father. I quickly entered his passcode and opened their text thread. What I found there would haunt me for months. Messages going back 8 months. Love declarations. Photos I couldn't bear to look at. Plans for their future together. And scattered throughout, references to "when Dorothy finally finds out" and "after the divorce is final." But the most devastating message was from March 15th, sent at 5:12 p.m., 25 minutes after Grace was born. Milo. "She had the baby. It's done. I'm free now. Can't wait to start our real family together." Bree. "I love you so much. Our baby is going to have the most amazing daddy." Milo. "February can't come soon enough. Our son will never know what almost happened." February. Bree was due in February, which meant she'd gotten pregnant in May, the same month I had conceived. Grace. My husband hadn't just been cheating on me throughout my pregnancy. He'd been living a completely double life, planning a future with his pregnant secretary while I carried what I believed was his first child. The shower was still running. Grace was sleeping peacefully in her bouncer, and I was sitting in my kitchen, holding the phone that contained evidence of the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined. But as devastating as these discoveries were, they were nothing compared to what I would learn when I decided to dig deeper into exactly when these relationships had started, and whether the man I'd married had ever been faithful to me at all. Armed with the knowledge that Bree was pregnant and due in February, I spent the next week conducting what I can only describe as forensic accounting of my marriage. Every credit card statement, every bank transfer, every unexplained absence suddenly took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of systematic deception. I created a timeline on my laptop, cross-referencing Milo's behavior changes with the financial evidence I'd gathered. What emerged was a pattern so methodical it made my stomach turn. May 2023. Both Bree and I conceived our children within weeks of each other. That month, Milo had claimed to be working on a major restructuring project that required late nights and weekend trips. The credit card statements showed charges to hotels in neighboring cities on weekends when he'd supposedly been at corporate retreats. June 2023. The first transfer to the M&B account. $200, small enough to escape notice. That same month, Milo had started coming home with new cologne, claiming his old one was too strong for my pregnancy-sensitive nose. July 2023. Multiple charges to maternity stores. Not the ones where we'd shopped for my pregnancy clothes, but to high-end boutiques across town. He'd been buying maternity clothes for Bree while I was struggling with morning sickness and body changes. August 2023, a $3,000 withdrawal labeled medical expenses. When I'd asked about it, he'd claimed it was for upgraded health insurance for our growing family, but our insurance hadn't changed, and now I realized he'd been paying for Bree's prenatal care. The pattern was clear. For every milestone in my pregnancy, there had been a corresponding secret expense for Bree's. 2 women, both carrying his children, both being managed like separate compartments of his life. While Grace napped, I decided to investigate Bree's social media presence. I'd never bothered looking her up before. Why would I suspect my husband's secretary of anything? Her Instagram was public, filled with carefully curated lifestyle photos. But now, knowing what to look for, the evidence was everywhere. June. Photo of her at a spa. Caption reading, "Treating myself to some self-care $blessed." The location tag showed it was the same luxury spa where Milo had allegedly taken a client for a team-building retreat. July. Multiple photos of expensive dinners at restaurants I recognized from our credit card statements. She'd been dining at places that cost more than most people's weekly salary while I was at home eating crackers to combat morning sickness. August. A professionally shot maternity photo in a flowing white dress, taken at the Botanical Gardens. The timestamp showed it was taken on a Saturday when Milo had told me he was at the office catching up on paperwork. September. Photos from what appeared to be a weekend getaway to a coastal resort. Champagne glasses, empty obviously since she was pregnant, couples massages, sunset dinners. The dates matched exactly with a weekend when Milo had claimed to be at a mandatory corporate retreat that spouses weren't invited to attend. But the most damning evidence was subtle. In several photos, there was a man's hand reaching for her, or the edge of someone's shoulder in frame. A watch I recognized, a shirt I'd bought for Milo's birthday. She'd been documenting their relationship in plain sight, just careful enough to keep his face out of the photos. As I scrolled through months of Bree's social media, a horrifying realization dawned on me. Every pregnancy milestone I'd experienced, she'd experienced too. And Milo had been there for hers. When I'd had my 20-week ultrasound, the appointment where we learned Grace's gender, Milo had seemed distracted and kept checking his phone. Bree's Instagram from that same day showed a single photo, a sonogram image with the caption, "Our little miracle is a boy. Our little miracle." While I was excitedly showing him grainy images of what I thought was his first child, he already knew he was having a son with another woman. The anatomy scan, the glucose test, the 3rd trimester, appointments where Milo became increasingly unavailable. Each one corresponded with posts from Bree about her own pregnancy journey. Doctor visits, prenatal vitamins, nursery planning. She'd been living the pregnancy experience I thought I was sharing exclusively with my husband. In October, when I'd started having Braxton Hicks contractions and needed Milo to drive me to the hospital for monitoring, he'd been irritated and rushed. That same day, Bree had posted about a pregnancy scare that had her rushing to the doctor with my amazing support system. He'd been playing the devoted father-to-be for both of us, just never at the same time. This revelation led me to examine our own pregnancy journey more critically. All those times Milo had seemed disinterested in nursery planning, or when he'd suggested we keep things simple for Grace's room. Had he been saving his enthusiasm for another nursery? I remembered how he'd balked at spending money on the premium crib I'd wanted for Grace, claiming we needed to be financially responsible with a baby coming, but the bank statement showed he'd transferred $5,000 to the M&B account that same week. While I'd been shopping at Target and secondhand stores for Grace's furniture, hunting for deals and using coupons, he'd been funding a luxury nursery for his son with Bree. The realization made me physically ill. I'd worried about our budget, skipped meals to save money, bought discount diapers and generic baby formula. Meanwhile, he'd been creating a secret savings account funded by money I'd helped earn and save. I started to wonder, when Grace was born and he'd arrived 4 hours late smelling like champagne, had he been celebrating more than just a work contract? Had he been toasting the fact that his real family was still a secret? That he'd successfully compartmentalized both pregnancies without either woman discovering the truth? My growing suspicion that this deception ran deeper than I'd imagined led me to do something I'd never considered before. I called Pinnacle Marketing Solutions and asked to speak with someone in HR. "Hi, this is Dorothy Martinez, Milo Martinez's wife. I'm organizing a surprise for his birthday and wanted to coordinate with his team. Could you tell me who he works most closely with?" The HR representative, a cheerful woman named Janet, was happy to help. "Oh, Milo's wonderful. He primarily works with our account management team. His direct reports include Thomas Chen, Kurt Williams, and of course his executive assistant Bree Thompson." Executive assistant? I thought she was his secretary. Oh no. Bree was promoted to executive assistant last spring. She's been instrumental in several major account acquisitions. Actually, she's been out on extended leave since last week. Personal matter, I believe. Extended leave. Last week was exactly when I'd started finding evidence of their relationship. "That's strange," I said, fishing for more information. "Milo mentioned she'd been helping with a big presentation this week." "I'm not sure about that. Her leave was approved by HR for medical reasons. Confidential, of course, but she's expected to be out through the end of February. Medical leave through February, the month her baby was due." "Well, I hope everything's okay with her." "Oh, I'm sure it will be. She's such a lovely girl. Did you know she's expecting? Such exciting news for her and her partner." Partner, not husband, which meant she was unmarried and pregnant with my husband's child. After I hung up, I sat in my living room holding Grace, trying to process what I'd learned. Bree wasn't just Milo's secretary having an affair. She'd been promoted to a position that gave her more access to him, more reasons to work late, more justification for travel and after-hours meetings. And now she was on medical leave, preparing to have his baby while I struggled with postpartum recovery and the demands of a newborn. The scope of their deception was staggering. This wasn't a casual affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a carefully orchestrated double life, planned, and executed with the precision of a military operation. But as devastating as these discoveries were, I was about to learn that the situation was even more complicated than I'd imagined. Because when I decided to dig deeper into the timeline of their relationship, I would uncover evidence that would make me question everything I thought I knew about Grace's conception, and whether the baby I was holding was even Milo's daughter at all. While organizing photos of Grace's first month for a digital album, I stumbled upon something that changed everything. Our shared iCloud account, something I'd set up years ago for convenience, had been automatically backing up photos from both our phones. I'd never bothered to look at Milo's camera roll before. Why would I? But now, desperate for answers, I scrolled through months of his photos, looking for evidence of the double life I was beginning to understand. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Hundreds of photos spanning back over a year. Pictures of Bree at restaurants, on weekend trips, in intimate moments I couldn't bear to study closely. But it was the metadata that told the real story. Dates, times, and locations that created an undeniable timeline of deception. May 2023. The same weekend I'd told Milo I was pregnant, there were photos of him and Bree at a romantic bed and breakfast 3 hours away. They were both wearing wedding rings. Not our wedding rings. Different ones. Gold bands that suggested they were playing house, pretending to be married. June 2023. Photos from what appeared to be a doctor's appointment. Bree in a medical gown, Milo holding her hand, both smiling at a sonogram image. The timestamp showed it was taken during the workday when he'd texted me that he was in back-to-back meetings and couldn't talk. July 2023. A series of photos from a furniture store. Bree pointing at cribs, Milo carrying shopping bags, both of them in the baby section, of what looked like an expensive boutique. The date was one day after he'd told me we couldn't afford the premium crib I wanted for our nursery. But the most devastating photos were from August. Pictures of Bree's growing belly being lovingly caressed by hands I recognized as my husband's. Professional maternity photos where he was the clearly intended subject, just cropped out of frame. While I'd been begging him to come to my own doctor's appointments, he'd been playing devoted father-to-be for another woman. The photo evidence led me to investigate other digital footprints. Milo had always been careless about logging out of shared devices, and our home computer still had his email accounts saved. What I found in his deleted folder made me realize the affair was just the beginning of his deception. Emails between Milo and someone named Thomas Walker, who appeared to be a divorce attorney, dating back to April 2023, before either pregnancy was announced. Mr. Martinez, as we discussed, establishing separate assets before filing will strengthen your position significantly. The business account transfers you've initiated are a good start. Business account transfers. The M&B fund wasn't just about building a future with Bree. It was about hiding assets from me in preparation for divorce. Another email from May 2023. Regarding timeline concerns. If pregnancy complicates filing, we can delay until after birth. Court sympathy for new mothers could affect settlement negotiations. He'd been planning to divorce me since before I even knew I was pregnant. Grace's conception hadn't been the happy surprise I'd thought. It had been an inconvenient complication to his exit strategy. But the most chilling email was from July. Thomas, Bree is concerned about Dorothy finding out before we're ready. Is there any legal advantage to waiting until after both babies are born? We want to ensure paternity testing can proceed without complications. Both babies. Paternity testing. He'd been planning DNA tests for both children before either of us had given birth. Digging deeper into his email, I found correspondence with banks I'd never heard of. Account openings, investment portfolios, even applications for credit cards in his name only. Milo hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been systematically hiding our marital assets for over a year. The most damaging evidence was a series of emails with a financial advisor discussing asset protection strategies for high conflict, divorce proceedings. The advisor had recommended creating multiple accounts, transferring funds gradually to avoid detection, and ensuring that community property complications were minimized. Community property complications. That's what I was to him, a legal obstacle to his future happiness. One email from September made my blood run cold. Mr. Martinez, I've reviewed your wife's employment history and earning potential. Given her limited career advancement and upcoming maternity leave, spousal support obligations should be minimal. The key is demonstrating her ability to be self-sufficient post-divorce. They'd been strategizing how to leave me with as little as possible. While I'd been preparing for motherhood, excited about our growing family, Milo had been calculating how to abandon me with the least financial impact on his new life. As I delved deeper into his digital trail, I discovered that the deception extended beyond just hiding money and conducting an affair. Milo had been actively manipulating my social connections to isolate me. Emails to my boss at the marketing firm where I worked, ostensibly supportive but subtly undermining. Dorothy's been having a difficult pregnancy. She may need extended time off after the baby comes. I want to ensure she doesn't feel pressured to return before she's ready. My boss had mentioned that Milo had been so thoughtful about my needs, but now I realized he'd been setting up my job to be less secure when he abandoned me. Messages to mutual friends, positioning himself as the concerned husband dealing with my pregnancy hormones and emotional instability. He'd been laying groundwork for people to see our eventual divorce as inevitable, with me as the unstable party. Most disturbing were emails with his lawyer about documenting instances of emotional volatility, and keeping records of my pregnancy-related mood swings. He'd been building a case to paint me as an unfit mother, should custody of Grace become an issue. But the discovery that shattered my world completely was buried in his Google search history, which I accessed through our shared family account. Searches. Spanning back to April 2023. How long after vasectomy until sterile? Vasectomy reversal success rates. Can pregnancy occur immediately after vasectomy reversal? Vasectomy. Milo had gotten a vasectomy. More searches from May. Timeline for fertility after vasectomy reversal. Sperm count testing post-reversal. Natural conception versus IVF after reversal. I sat staring at the computer screen, Grace sleeping peacefully, in my arms, as the implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. If Milo had gotten a vasectomy, and if Grace was conceived in May, then either the reversal had failed, or Grace wasn't his daughter. I scrolled frantically through more search results. Paternity testing accuracy. Non-invasive prenatal paternity. Tests. Legal requirements for paternity testing in custody cases. He'd been researching paternity tests before Grace was even born. He'd been planning to prove she wasn't his child. But if Grace wasn't Milo's daughter, then who was her father? I tried to remember May 2023, the timeline of our conception. There had been the company retreat where I'd met Thomas Chen, from accounting, who'd been at the company retreat where spouses were invited. The same Thomas who'd been friendly, charming, and had walked me back to my room when I'd had too much wine at the company dinner. The same Thomas whose name appeared in Milo's work emails as someone who knew about the Dorothy situation and would be discreet about timing. My heart raced as I realized the scope of what I was uncovering. This wasn't just about Milo cheating with his secretary. This was about a conspiracy that went deeper than I'd imagined, involving people I'd trusted, situations I'd completely misunderstood. Grace stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers grasping at air, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about her conception, about my marriage, about the past year of my life, had been carefully orchestrated lies. And I was about to discover that the paternity test I'd assumed would prove Grace was Milo's daughter would actually expose a web of deception so complex that it would destroy not just my marriage, but multiple families and careers. The truth was about to set me free, but first, it was going to devastate everything I'd believed about my life. I was feeding Grace her morning bottle, my mind still reeling from the discovery of Milo's vasectomy. Research when my phone rang. Dr. Patricia Hernandez's office, Grace's pediatrician. Mrs. Martinez? This is Linda from Dr. Hernandez's office. We need to schedule Grace for some additional blood work. There were some irregularities in her newborn screening that require follow-up. My stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? Is she sick? Nothing immediately concerning, but Dr. Hernandez wants to run a more comprehensive metabolic panel. It's standard procedure when certain markers are atypical. Can you come in this afternoon? 3 hours later, I sat in the sterile pediatric office while a technician drew blood from Grace's tiny arm. Dr. Hernandez, a woman I'd come to trust implicitly during my pregnancy, sat across from me with Grace's chart. Dorothy, I need to ask you some questions about family medical history. Grace's blood work shows some genetic markers that don't align with what we'd typically expect. What do you mean? Has your husband ever been tested for metabolic disorders? Specifically, does his family have any history of Mediterranean genetic conditions? I stared at her blankly. Mediterranean? Milo's family is Irish and German. His grandfather immigrated from Dublin. Dr. Hernandez frowned, making notes. That's unusual. Grace is showing markers consistent with Mediterranean ancestry, specifically, traits we see in families of Greek or Southern Italian descent. The room seemed to tilt. Are you saying Grace isn't, that there's been some mistake? I'm saying we need more comprehensive testing. With your permission, I'd like to run a full genetic panel. It will help us understand Grace's health profile and, well, it will provide clarity about her ancestry. The following week, I met with Sarah Kim, a genetic counselor Dr. Hernandez had recommended. She explained the results in clinical terms that somehow made them more devastating. Mrs. Martinez, Grace's genetic profile shows clear Mediterranean markers that are inconsistent with the Irish-German ancestry you've provided for your husband. However, they're completely consistent with your reported ancestry. I don't understand. Your family background includes Greek heritage on your mother's side, correct? Grace has inherited strong Mediterranean genetic markers that had to come from her father's side as well. Sarah pulled out a chart showing genetic inheritance patterns. When both parents carry certain Mediterranean genes, their children express these traits more prominently. Grace's profile suggests her father has significant Greek or Southern Italian ancestry. My voice came out as a whisper. So Milo can't be her father. Based on these genetic markers alone, it's highly unlikely. But Mrs. Martinez, there's something else. Have you ever heard of chimerism? I shook my head. It's a rare condition where someone carries two distinct sets of DNA. Given the unusual nature of Grace's genetic profile, we'd recommend a definitive paternity test using multiple DNA samples to rule out any genetic anomalies. She handed me a requisition form. This test will require DNA samples from you, Grace, and the presumed father. It's the most comprehensive paternity analysis available. That night, I sat in Grace's nursery, staring at her sleeping face and trying to piece together the timeline of her conception. If Milo had gotten a vasectomy, and if Grace's genetic markers pointed to Mediterranean ancestry, then I needed to remember every detail of May 2023, the company retreat. 3 days at a lakeside resort where Pinnacle Marketing had taken their top performers and their families. Milo had been distracted the entire weekend, constantly on his phone, claiming urgent client issues that couldn't wait. I remembered feeling lonely, out of place among the other corporate wives who seemed more polished, more confident. I'd spent most of Saturday at the bar, nursing wine and feeling sorry for myself while Milo networked with potential clients. That's when Thomas Chen had found me. Thomas Chen. Accounting supervisor, recently divorced, charming in a quiet way that was completely different from Milo's aggressive confidence. He'd sat beside me at the bar, bought me drinks, listened to me complain about feeling invisible in my own marriage. Your husband's an idiot if he's not paying attention to you, he'd said, and I'd felt beautiful for the first time in months. We'd talked for hours about his recent divorce, about my growing suspicion that Milo was pulling away from me, about feeling lonely in relationships that should have fulfilled us. The wine had made everything feel more significant, more connected. When he'd walked me back to my room, I'd been drunker than I'd realized. Milo wasn't there. Another emergency call had sent him to his car to handle business. Thomas had helped me with my key card, made sure I got inside safely, and then the memory came back in fragments, pieces I'd buried under months of guilt and rationalization. Thomas helping me sit down because I was unsteady, bringing me water from the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the bed to make sure I was okay. I'd been crying about Milo's emotional distance, about feeling unwanted and undesirable. Thomas had been comforting, reassuring, telling me I deserved better. The kiss had happened so gradually I could barely remember who initiated it. But I remembered his hands in my hair, the gentle way he'd touched me, so different from Milo's mechanical, perfunctory intimacy. I remembered waking up the next morning alone, Thomas gone, with only fragments of memory and a crushing hangover. I'd told myself nothing had really happened, that it was just a kiss, just comfort from a lonely man to a lonely woman. But now, staring at Grace's olive-toned skin, her dark hair that was nothing like mine or Milo's, I realized how much I'd suppressed. The missing hours, the way Thomas had avoided me for the rest of the retreat, the guilt that had eaten at me, for weeks afterward. 3 weeks later, I'd discovered I was pregnant. I'd assumed it was Milo's, despite our infrequent and passionless intimacy. The timing had seemed right, and I'd wanted so desperately to believe that our marriage was getting back on track. But if Milo had gotten a vasectomy months before the retreat, then Grace couldn't be his daughter. And if her genetic markers pointed to Mediterranean ancestry, Thomas Chen, whose family had immigrated from Greece in the 1960s. Thomas Chen, who'd been kind to me on the loneliest night of my marriage. Thomas Chen, who was now apparently part of Milo's conspiracy to cover up the truth about Grace's paternity. I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I called Thomas's direct line at Pinnacle Marketing, my hands shaking as I dialed. Thomas. Chen speaking. Thomas, this is Dorothy Martinez, Milo's wife. I need to talk to you. There was a long pause. Dorothy. Hi. Is everything okay? I think you know why I'm calling. Another pause, longer this time. Maybe we should talk in person. This isn't a conversation for the phone. Did you know about Grace? Dorothy, please. Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private? There are things you need to know about what Milo's been planning. What he's been planning? Thomas? Is Grace your daughter? The silence that followed was answer enough. Oh, God, I whispered. Dorothy, listen to me carefully. Milo knows. He's known since before Grace was born. And what he's planning? It's worse than you think. Can you meet me at Riverside Park in an hour? The pavilion by the lake. Come alone, and don't tell Milo. You're meeting me. Why? What's going to happen? Because Milo's not just planning to leave you. He's planning to destroy you. And he's been using Grace's paternity as leverage to do it. The line went dead, leaving me sitting in my kitchen, holding my phone and staring at the baby who'd just become the center of a conspiracy I was only beginning to understand. Grace cooed softly from her bouncer, completely unaware that her existence had become the focal point of a battle I hadn't even known was being fought. A battle where the stakes were her future, my freedom, and the truth about a night that would change everything. I had 1 hour to decide whether to trust the man who might be Grace's real father, or to continue living in the web of lies my husband had been weaving around all of us. But first, I had to accept that my marriage, my motherhood, and my understanding of my own life had all been built on deceptions so deep that uncovering them might destroy everything I had left. Riverside Park was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the crisp autumn afternoon. I found Thomas sitting on a bench near the lake pavilion, staring out at the water with the kind of stillness that comes from carrying heavy secrets. He looked older than I remembered from the company retreat 6 months ago. Stress lines around his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there when he'd comforted me that night. When he saw me approaching with Grace in her stroller, his face crumpled with an emotion I couldn't identify. "She's beautiful," he said softly, not quite meeting my eyes. "She has your nose." "Thomas, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." He was quiet for a long moment, then began speaking in the measured tone of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation many times. "The affair between Milo and Bree started 18 months ago, not 6 months like you think. I know because I'm the one who discovered it. It was October 2022. I was working late finishing quarterly reports when I heard voices in Milo's office. I went to ask him a question about budget allocations and found them. Together. Bree was supposed to have left hours earlier. Thomas rubbed his temples, the memory clearly painful. I should have reported it immediately. Office relationships, especially between executives and subordinates, violate company policy. But Milo saw me before I could leave. What did he do? He followed me to my office and offered me a promotion. Senior accounting supervisor, $20,000 raise, my own team. All I had to do was keep quiet about what I'd seen. Thomas's voice became bitter. I'd been divorced for 6 months, paying alimony and child support, struggling to make ends meet. The promotion would change everything for me and my kids, so I took the deal. But it didn't end there. No. Over the next few months, Milo started involving me in what he called financial planning, moving money around, setting up accounts, creating paper trails that would benefit him in a divorce. He told me you were emotionally unstable, that the marriage was failing, that he needed to protect his assets. I felt sick. You helped him steal from me. I thought I was helping him prepare for an inevitable divorce. He painted you as someone who was already planning to take him for everything. He said you'd been talking to lawyers, that you'd threatened to ruin him professionally if he left. Dorothy, Milo is a master manipulator. He spent months convincing me that you were the villain in his story. He showed me texts that he claimed were from you, threatening him. He said you'd been having affairs, that you were unstable and vindictive. Those texts were fake. I know that now. But at the time, combined with the financial pressure I was under and the promotion he'd given me, I believed him. I became his accomplice without realizing I was helping him systematically abuse you. Thomas turned to face me directly for the first time. The company retreat in May wasn't random, Dorothy. Milo planned it specifically to create a situation where you'd be vulnerable. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? He knew about your drinking habits when you're stressed. He knew you'd been feeling neglected and lonely. He arranged for me to be there, made sure I'd be at the bar when you were, even suggested I keep you company while he handled urgent business calls. He set us up. He orchestrated the entire evening, the emergency calls that kept him away, the drinks that kept coming, even suggesting I walk you back to your room. He wanted something to happen between us. The manipulation was so calculated, so cruel, that I could barely process it. Why? Why would he want his wife to cheat? Because he needed ammunition for the divorce. He needed you to be the unfaithful spouse, the one who destroyed the marriage. It would give him leverage in custody proceedings and asset division. Thomas, what really happened that night? I remember fragments, but he was quiet for a long time, watching Grace sleep peacefully in her stroller. You were drunker than I realized. When we got to your room, you were crying about Milo, about feeling invisible and unwanted. I was trying to comfort you, and yes, we kissed. But Dorothy, you passed out almost immediately after. I don't remember. You were unconscious. Nothing else happened. I made sure you were safe, left you some water and aspirin, and went back to my own room. I thought that was the end of it. Relief and confusion flooded through me simultaneously. But then, how is Grace? That's what I've been trying to figure out for months. When you announced your pregnancy, I assumed it was Milo's. The timing seemed right, and I knew nothing had really happened between us. But then Milo started making comments. What kind of comments? Jokes about Grace not looking like him. Questions about whether you'd been honest about the retreat. He started suggesting that maybe the baby wasn't his, but in a way that seemed like he was worried, not like he already knew. It wasn't until last month that I realized what had really happened. Milo came to me with a proposal. He said he needed my help with one final phase of his divorce preparation. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. He wanted me to claim that we'd had an affair, to sign an affidavit stating that Grace was my daughter, that I'd been having a relationship with you throughout your marriage. I stared at the messages, each one more damning than the last. Milo's requests for Thomas to come clean about their affair, to do the right thing, and acknowledge Grace as his daughter. He offered me $50,000 to sign a statement claiming Grace was mine. He said it would help him get full custody of his real child with Bree, and that you'd be so humiliated by the public exposure that you'd agree to a quiet divorce with minimal demands. But Grace actually is yours. That's what I don't understand. How can she be mine if you were unconscious? The pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place in my mind, each realization more horrifying than the last. Thomas, what if we didn't sleep together, but Milo wanted everyone to think we did? What if he needed Grace to be yours for his plan? To work? I don't follow. What if Milo arranged for Grace to be your daughter without either of us knowing it? What if the night at the retreat was about more than just creating the appearance of an affair? Thomas stared at me, comprehension dawning slowly. You're saying I'm saying that Milo is capable of anything to get what he wants. And what he wanted was a way to destroy me completely while appearing to be the victim. As we sat in the growing afternoon shadows, Grace stirring in her stroller between us, I realized that the conspiracy I'd uncovered was even more sinister than I'd imagined. And the man I'd married was capable of violations so profound that they challenged everything I thought I knew about human decency. The truth about Grace's conception was still hidden, but the evidence was pointing toward something so dark that part of me hoped I'd never fully understand what had been done to me that night at the retreat. Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever had any medical procedures done? Anything that might have involved samples? Thomas looked confused. What kind of samples? Sperm samples. For fertility testing, or storage, or any medical reason. His face went pale. Why would you ask that? Because I think Milo has been planning this for longer than either of us realized. If Grace is genetically yours, but we didn't actually sleep together, then how else could— Oh my God. Thomas stood up abruptly, pacing away from the bench. The company health screening. What health screening? Last spring. March, I think. Pinnacle brought in a private medical company to do comprehensive health screenings for all senior staff. Blood work, cardiac stress tests, fertility assessments for family planning benefits. It was all paid for by the company, completely voluntary. My heart started racing. Did you participate? Yes. They said the fertility assessment was to help the company design better family planning benefits. They needed baseline data about employee fertility health. It seemed legitimate, and the results were supposed to be completely confidential. Who organized the screening? HR coordinated it, but Milo was the one who recommended the medical company. He said they were the best in the region, that he'd researched them personally. The implications hit us both simultaneously. Thomas sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. You think he used my sample to artificially inseminate you? I think Milo has been planning to destroy me for over a year, and he needed a way to make sure Grace wasn't his biological daughter, while also having a way to prove you were the father. The retreat gave him the opportunity and the cover story. Thomas was shaking. But how? When? You would have known if someone had artificially inseminated you. Not if I was unconscious. Not if it was done by someone who had medical knowledge and access to the right equipment. Milo doesn't have medical training. No, but Bree does. Her resume said she had a background in medical administration before she came to Pinnacle. And they've been planning this together for 18 months. The scope of the violation was so immense that we both sat in stunned silence. Grace continued, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her very existence was the result of a calculated crime. Thomas, the money you helped Milo move around, where did it all go? Most of it went into the M&B account like you discovered. But there were other transfers too. Payments to medical facilities, legal fees, something called genetic consulting, services. Genetic consulting? I never questioned it. He said it was for family planning with Bree, making sure their future children would be healthy. But now we know he was planning genetic fraud on multiple levels. Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. There were payments to a fertility clinic called Advanced Reproductive Solutions, $15,000 over 3 months. And payments to a company called DNA Dynamics, $8,000 for what he called family genetic profiling. He was paying to have genetic evidence planted that would support his story. He wanted to be able to prove Grace was yours, prove that I'd been unfaithful, and used that to destroy me in divorce proceedings. But Dorothy, there's something else. Something I didn't understand until now. Thomas showed me more financial records on his phone. These payments to lawyers weren't just for divorce preparation. Some of them were to criminal defense attorneys. Criminal defense? Look at the dates. These payments started in February, a month before Grace was born. Milo wasn't just planning a divorce. He was planning to have you arrested. Arrested for what? Think about it. If Grace is genetically mine, and if everyone believes we had an affair, then from the outside it looks like you committed adultery, possibly extorted money from him, and were planning to pass off another man's child as his. But none of that is true. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what he can prove. With the right evidence, the right testimony, the right financial trail, he could have made a case that you were the one running a long-term deception. The criminal attorney payments made horrifying sense. He was going to have me charged with fraud, claim that I'd been stealing from our joint accounts to pay for my affair, that I'd deliberately deceived him about Grace's paternity. And with me as his star witness testifying that we'd had an ongoing relationship and that Grace was mine, you'd have no defense. Except you're not going to testify to that. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, there's something else you need to. No, Milo didn't just ask me to lie about our relationship. He has evidence that he claims proves we had an affair. What evidence? Photos. Video. Documentation of meetings that supposedly happened but didn't. He's created an entire false timeline of our relationship spanning months. He showed me some of it last week. Photos of us at restaurants in what looked like intimate conversations. But Dorothy, I've never been to those restaurants with you. I've barely spoken to you outside of work events. The photos are fake? They have to be. But they're incredibly sophisticated. Professional quality. Someone spent serious money creating them. Thomas showed me his phone again, scrolling to a folder of images. He sent me these, saying they were insurance in case I ever decided not to cooperate. Look at this. The photos were devastating. Images of Thomas and me at romantic dinners, walking hand in hand through parks, embracing in what appeared to be hotel lobbies. They looked completely real, but I knew I'd never been to any of those places with him. How is this possible? Deep fake technology, digital manipulation. With enough photos of both of us from company events and social media, someone with the right software could create anything. The genetic consulting payments probably went to whoever created these. Milo has been building a false reality so complete that even we started to doubt our own memories. The level of premeditation was staggering. Milo hadn't just planned to leave me. He'd planned to destroy my reputation, my financial security, and my relationship with Grace so thoroughly that I'd have nothing left. Thomas, what changed? Why are you telling me this now instead of going along with his plan? Because yesterday Bree called me. She's going into labor early, and she's scared. She told me things about Milo that made me realize he's planning to destroy her too, once he doesn't need her anymore. What kind of things? She found evidence that he's been planning to claim her baby isn't his either. He's been setting her up the same way he set you up. Once both babies are born and he has genetic evidence of paternity fraud, he's planning to abandon both of you and disappear with all the money. The scope of Milo's deception was so vast that it took my breath away. 2 women, 2 babies, both, being systematically destroyed by a man who saw them as obstacles to his perfect future. But what Milo didn't know was that his victims were about to become allies. Thomas, we need to meet with Bree. If Milo is planning to destroy both of us, then we need to work together to stop him. She's terrified. 8 months pregnant, financially dependent on him, and realizing that everything he's promised her has been lies. She doesn't know who to trust. She can trust us because we're the only ones who know the truth about what he's capable of. Thomas checked his watch. She's at her apartment. She's been on bed rest since last week. Not for medical reasons, but because Milo told her boss she was having pregnancy complications. another lie to isolate her. Can you arrange a meeting? I'll call her. But Dorothy, you need to understand what we're up against. Milo isn't just planning fraud. He's been systematically destroying evidence that could exonerate us while creating evidence that could convict us. As we drove to Bree's apartment, Thomas explained the scope of Milo's evidence manipulation. It wasn't just the fake photos and financial records. He'd been actively destroying anything that could prove our innocence. The security footage from the hotel during the retreat? The company had a data breach in July that conveniently wiped 6 months of archived footage. The breach was reported by IT, but guess who was in charge of coordinating with the security? Company? Milo. The medical records from your pregnancy, the real timeline of when Grace was conceived, even the original health screening results that would show my actual fertility status, it's all been compromised or destroyed. How is that possible? When you have access to HR systems, financial records, and vendor relationships, it's easier than you'd think. A few strategic data corruptions, some lost paperwork, vendors who suddenly can't locate specific files. Milo has been erasing the truth while building his false narrative. But there has to be something left, some evidence that proves what really happened. Thomas was quiet for a moment. There might be, but it's going to require us to do something that could be very dangerous. Bree's apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a complex on the other side of town. When she opened the door, I was struck by how young she looked and how terrified. Her pregnancy was obvious, her belly round and low, but her face was gaunt with stress. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry," were the first words out of her mouth. "I never knew about you, about Grace, about any of it until a few weeks ago." "What do you mean you never knew about me?" Milo told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had moved across the country with their child and wanted nothing to do with him. He showed me legal documents, custody agreements, everything that seemed to prove you'd abandoned him. We sat in her small living room, Grace sleeping in her carrier between us, while Bree explained her version of the past 18 months. "He said you'd been abusive, that you'd stolen money from him and disappeared. He showed me medical records that he claimed proved you were mentally unstable. I felt sorry for him, this successful, charming man who'd been so badly hurt by his ex-wife. All lies. Elaborate lies. He had documentation for everything. Photos of you that he said showed evidence of drug use, financial records that seemed to prove you'd emptied his accounts, even recordings of phone calls where a woman's voice was saying terrible things about him. Voice recordings? AI-generated probably, but at the time, I believed them. I thought I was helping him rebuild his life after a traumatic divorce. Bree, when did you find out the truth?" 3 weeks ago. I was at his house looking for antacids in his medicine cabinet when I found fertility drugs. Not the kind men take, the kind women take for artificial insemination. My blood ran cold. "What kind of drugs?" "Ovulation stimulants, progesterone supplements, the whole protocol for assisted reproduction." When I asked him about them, he said they were left over from his ex-wife's fertility treatments, but the prescription dates were recent. How recent? Some from last month. Others from around the time Grace would have been conceived. Thomas and I exchanged glances. "Bree, did Milo ever suggest you needed fertility assistance? Any medical procedures?" He insisted on it, said his family had a history of fertility issues, and he wanted to make sure we could have healthy children. I went to a clinic he recommended. Had comprehensive testing done. Advanced Reproductive Solutions? Yes. How did you know? Because Thomas went through the same process. Milo has been collecting genetic material from both of you. Bree's hand went to her stomach protectively. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that neither of our pregnancies happened the way we think they did. Milo has been manipulating our reproductive choices to serve his agenda." "There's more," Bree said quietly. "Last week, I called the clinic to ask about my test results. The receptionist told me that my account showed multiple procedures I never consented to. Egg retrievals, genetic screenings, something called selective fertilization, protocols. They took your eggs without your knowledge? During what I thought were routine fertility assessments. I was sedated for what they said was a comprehensive internal examination. But according to my medical records, they harvested multiple eggs and created embryos using genetic material from someone else. The implications were staggering. Milo has been creating designer babies, using your eggs, Thomas's sperm, and artificial implantation to control every aspect of our children's genetics. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Thomas spoke up. Because he needed children who were genetically traceable to specific fathers, but born to women who could be discredited as unfit mothers. It gives him the ultimate leverage in custody battles and financial settlements. He's been playing God with our biology to serve his legal strategy. Bree was crying now, her hands shaking as she tried to process the scope of the violation. What about our babies? What does this mean for Grace and my son? It means they're both victims of the same crime, and it means we have evidence that could destroy Milo's entire plan. What evidence? The clinic records. If we can prove that Milo coordinated unauthorized medical procedures, that he stole genetic material and manipulated our pregnancies without consent, then everything he's built falls apart. Thomas leaned forward. But getting that evidence is going to require us to break into the clinic's computer system. And if we're caught, Milo will have everything he needs to destroy us completely. We sat in silence, 3 victims of an elaborate conspiracy, holding babies who were both the evidence of our victimization and the motivation for our resistance. The choice was clear. We could remain passive victims of Milo's manipulation, or we could fight back with everything we had. But fighting back meant risking everything we had left to lose. We can't go to the police, Thomas said, pacing Bree's small living room. Milo has spent months building evidence that makes us look like the criminals. Any investigation would start with us as suspects. And we can't go to lawyers, I added. He's already paid criminal defense attorneys. He knows exactly what legal strategies we might use, and he's prepared for them. Bree shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her pregnancy making it difficult to find a comfortable position. So what do we do? Just let him destroy all of us? No. We do what he least expects. We gather evidence the same way he did, systematically, comprehensively, and without him knowing. I had been thinking about this since we'd discovered the scope of Milo's conspiracy. He's made one crucial mistake. He thinks we're all isolated, that we don't know about each other's situations. He's been managing us like separate cases instead of realizing we could become allies. What kind of evidence do we need? Everything. The clinic records proving unauthorized procedures, financial records showing where our money really went, the fake photos and AI-generated evidence he created, and most importantly, proof that he's been systematically defrauding multiple people. Thomas sat down across from us. I still have access to the company's financial systems. If I can trace the payments he made to various vendors, we might be able to build a timeline that proves premeditation. And I have something too, Bree said quietly. Milo doesn't know this, but I've been recording our conversations for the past month. You've been recording him? My ex-boyfriend was emotionally abusive. My therapist recommended I start documenting conversations when I felt gaslighted or manipulated. When Milo started saying things that contradicted what he'd told me before, I started recording everything. Bree pulled out her phone and scrolled through voice memo files. I have him admitting to falsifying medical records. I have him talking about phase 2 of his plan, which involves having both of you declared unfit mothers. And I have him discussing something called the final extraction. Final extraction? His plan to disappear with all the hidden money once the legal proceedings are complete. He's been planning to abandon both babies and start fresh somewhere else with a new identity. The recordings were devastating. In Milo's own voice, we heard him describe us as complications to be managed and our children as leverage points in the asset distribution strategy. But the most damning recording was from just 2 days ago. He called me panicking about something. Listen to this. Milo's voice came through the phone speaker, agitated and angry. The DNA results came back exactly as planned, but Dorothy's been asking too many questions. She knows about the bank accounts, and she's been talking to people at the clinic. What does that mean? Came Bree's voice on the recording. It means we might need to accelerate the timeline. If she figures out what we did at the retreat, everything falls apart. What we did? Milo, you said nothing happened between her and Thomas. Nothing did happen, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is making sure she can't prove it. There's more, Bree continued. I called the clinic yesterday pretending to need my medical records for a new doctor. They sent me everything, including procedures I never consented to. She showed us printed medical records that detailed a horrifying timeline of unauthorized interventions. Look at this. March 15th, the day Grace was born, I was scheduled for what they called pregnancy monitoring. But according to these records, they performed genetic material extraction that day. Genetic material extraction? They took eggs from me while I was under sedation for what I thought was routine pregnancy monitoring. The same day Dorothy was giving birth, they were harvesting my genetic material for future use. Thomas studied the records. And look at these dates in April and May. Multiple procedures listed as fertility optimization, but described in the clinical notes as genetic material preparation and storage. They've been running an unauthorized fertility clinic operation, using us as unwilling participants. The medical records revealed a systematic pattern of violations spanning months, procedures performed without consent, genetic material harvested and stored, embryos created and implanted without the knowledge of the biological parents. I need to access the company servers tonight, Thomas said. If I can download the complete financial records before Milo realizes we're working together, we'll have evidence of every payment he made to clinics, lawyers, and technology companies. How can you access them without being detected? I still have administrative privileges for the accounting systems, but once I download the files, it will leave a digital trail. We'll have maybe 12 hours before he knows what we've done. 12 hours to do what? To gather everything else we need, and get it all to the authorities before he can destroy the evidence or disappear. I thought about the timeline. Bree, when is your baby due? Any day now. I've been having contractions on and off for the past week. And when is Milo planning to implement his final phase? She checked her recordings. According to this conversation from yesterday, he's planning to file legal papers next week. Custody challenges for both babies, fraud charges against both of you, and asset protection orders that would freeze everything. So we have days, not weeks. Here's what we're going to do, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Thomas, you download the financial records tonight. Everything. Payments, transfers, vendor contracts, the whole paper trail. Bree, you organize all your recordings and medical records. We need a timeline that shows exactly when each violation occurred and what Milo said about his plans. What about the clinic records? I'm going to get those myself. Dr. Hernandez referred me there originally for Grace's genetic testing. I have legitimate medical reasons to request my complete file. Dorothy, that's dangerous. If they're part of Milo's conspiracy, they'll know. You're investigating. Then we make it look like I'm cooperating with his plan. I'll tell them I want to pursue genetic testing to establish Grace's paternity for legal purposes. They'll think I'm playing into Milo's hands. Thomas nodded slowly. It could work. If you approach it as wanting to help resolve the paternity question, they might give you access to records they wouldn't normally release. But we need backup plans. If any part of this goes wrong, if Milo realizes what we're doing, we need to be ready to act immediately. What kind of backup plans? Legal backup. I'm going to contact a victim's rights attorney tonight. Someone who specializes in reproductive crimes and financial fraud. We need legal protection before we make any moves against Milo. And media backup, Bree added. If he tries to discredit us publicly, we need to be ready to tell our story first. As we finalized our strategy, Grace began stirring in her carrier. Looking at her innocent face, I realized that everything we were planning was for her and Bree's unborn son. 2 children who deserved to know the truth about their origins and to grow up free from the consequences of their father's crimes. We had 48 hours to gather evidence that could expose years of systematic abuse. 48 hours to prove that we were victims, not criminals. 48 hours to reclaim our lives from a man who had stolen everything from our biology to our bank accounts. The war against Milo was about to begin, and this time, he wouldn't be fighting isolated victims. He'd be fighting an alliance. That evening, while Milo worked late at what he claimed was crisis management for the Henderson account, I contacted the law firm that Dr. Hernandez had recommended months earlier. Attorney Sarah Rodriguez specialized in reproductive rights violations and medical fraud. Exactly what we needed. Mrs. Martinez, what you're describing constitutes multiple felonies, she said during our phone consultation. Non-consensual artificial insemination, genetic material theft, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. This isn't a civil matter. This is a criminal enterprise. Can you help us gather evidence without alerting the perpetrator? I can. Do better than that. I can file for emergency protective orders that will freeze all assets and prevent document destruction the moment you're ready to move forward. But I need you to understand the risks. What risks? If your husband realizes you're building a case against him, he might accelerate his timeline. Men who commit these kinds of calculated crimes often have contingency plans that include eliminating witnesses or evidence. The word eliminating sent chills through me. You think he's dangerous? I think he's desperate. And desperate people do unpredictable things. I'm going to assign an investigator to monitor his activities while you gather evidence for your protection. The next morning, I called Advanced Reproductive Solutions and requested an appointment to discuss paternity confirmation testing for Grace. The receptionist, clearly familiar with my case, scheduled me immediately. Dr. Morrison has been expecting your call, she said. He mentioned that your husband had discussed the need for comprehensive genetic analysis. Dr. Morrison was a thin man in his 50s, with the kind of clinical detachment that made me instantly uncomfortable. His office was filled with fertility success stories, photos of babies born through his clinic's interventions. Mrs. Martinez, your husband explained the delicate situation regarding your daughter's paternity. We're here to help resolve any questions scientifically and discreetly. I want to understand exactly what testing was done and when. Of course. Let me pull your complete file. As he scrolled through his computer, I noticed multiple monitors, displaying patient information. From my angle, I could see names, procedure codes, and dates, information that should have been private. Here we are. You were first seen in May for fertility consultation, then again in June for genetic material collection, and multiple times through your pregnancy for monitoring. I was never here in May or June. Dr. Morrison looked at me with practiced sympathy. Mrs. Martinez, memory issues during pregnancy are common. Perhaps your husband accompanied you. Sometimes couples remember appointments differently, but as he turned his monitor toward me, I saw the evidence I needed. My supposed appointments had been scheduled and paid for by Milo, but the patient's signature on the consent forms wasn't mine. Someone had forged my signature for procedures I'd never consented to. Dr. Morrison, I'd like copies of all my medical records. Everything. I'm afraid that requires written consent from your husband as well, given the nature of the situation. The situation? The paternity questions. Your husband has legal guardianship concerns that require both parents' consent for medical record release. While I was at the clinic, Thomas was executing his part of our plan. He'd arrived at Pinnacle Marketing before dawn, using his legitimate access to download financial records that would expose Milo's conspiracy. What he found was even worse than we'd expected. The payments to Advanced Reproductive Solutions totaled over $150,000, not just for our procedures, but for a systematic operation involving at least 6 other women. Milo hadn't just targeted Bree and me. He'd been running a reproductive fraud scheme involving multiple victims. Other payments revealed the scope of his criminal enterprise: $75,000 to a company called Digital Evidence Solutions for AI-generated photos and videos, $50,000 to various private investigators for background verification and evidence collection, $25,000 to offshore financial services for asset protection and identity management. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between Milo and Dr. Morrison, detailing their partnership in what they called reproductive asset management for high-value divorce proceedings. Thomas photographed every document, downloaded every file, and copied every email thread. By 6 a.m., he had evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving medical fraud, financial crimes, and identity theft spanning over 2 years. As Thomas was finishing his digital investigation, his phone rang. It was Dr. Morrison's receptionist calling from her personal cell phone. "Mr. Chen, this is Janet from Advanced Reproductive Solutions. I need to speak with you urgently about your girlfriend, Dorothy." "She's not my girlfriend. And what do you mean urgently?" "I know she's not your girlfriend. I know none of this is real. And I know Dr. Morrison has been doing things to patients without their consent." Janet agreed to meet Thomas at a 24-hour diner across town. She brought with her a flash drive containing patient records that revealed the full scope of the clinic's criminal operations. "I've been documenting everything for months," she explained. "Dr. Morrison has been running unauthorized fertility procedures, harvesting genetic material, and creating embryos without patient knowledge. Your case isn't unique. There are at least 12 other couples being manipulated the same way. Why are you helping us?" "Because I have a daughter. And what they're doing to these women, to their children, it's evil. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back." The records Janet provided showed a systematic pattern of reproductive crimes. Women brought in for routine fertility consultations, then sedated for unauthorized procedures. Genetic material harvested and stored without consent. Embryos created using stolen genetic material and implanted during procedures the women believed were routine examinations. By afternoon, our 3-person team had assembled a comprehensive case file that documented every aspect of Milo's criminal enterprise: financial records proving systematic fraud, medical records documenting unauthorized procedures, audio recordings of Milo discussing his plans, witness testimony from a clinic insider. But as we met at Bree's apartment to review our evidence, we realized we had a new problem. "Milo came home early today," I reported. "He was agitated, making phone calls, packing a suitcase. I think he knows something's wrong." "Dr. Morrison called me this afternoon," Bree added. "He said there had been security concerns at the clinic, and that I needed to come in immediately for protective procedures. When I refused, he got angry." Thomas looked grim. "The company IT department flagged unusual activity in the financial systems. Someone's been accessing files that are typically restricted. Milo will know it was me by tomorrow. So we're out of time." "Worse than that. If Milo realizes we have evidence against him, he might try to destroy it. Or us." As if summoned by our fears, my phone rang. Milo's number. "Dorothy, where are you?" "I came home and you and Grace are gone." "We're running errands. Why?" "I need you to come home immediately. There's been a development in Grace's paternity situation that requires immediate action." His voice had the controlled urgency of someone barely containing panic. "What kind of development?" "I can't discuss it over the phone. Come home now. And Dorothy, don't stop anywhere else. Don't talk to anyone. This is a family emergency." The line went dead. leaving us staring at each other in growing alarm. "He knows," Thomas said simply. "Which means we have to move tonight," I replied. "Everything we've planned, all the evidence we've gathered. We have to act now or lose our only chance." The final confrontation was no longer something we were planning for the future. It was happening now. "We stick to the plan, but we accelerate everything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thomas, call Attorney Rodriguez and tell her we need those protective orders filed tonight. Bree, call Janet and tell her we need her to secure the clinic records immediately." "What about you?" Thomas asked. "I'm going home. If Milo suspects something, the worst thing I can do is avoid him. I need to act normal while giving you both time to secure the evidence." Bree grabbed my arm. "Dorothy, what if he's dangerous? What if he tries to hurt you or Grace? Then we'll have evidence of that too. I'm going to record everything from the moment I walk in that door." I set up my phone to record continuously, texted our attorney with my location, and drove home with Grace, my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear. Milo was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up, his face a mask of forced calm. He helped me carry Grace's car seat inside with unusual gentleness, but I could see the tension in his movements. "Dorothy, we need to talk. Something's happened that changes everything." "What's wrong?" "Sit down. This is going to be difficult to hear." He led me to the living room, positioning himself between me and the front door. Grace was sleeping peacefully in her carrier, unaware of the danger surrounding her. "I received a call from Thomas Chen today. He's confessed to having an affair with you, and he's claiming Grace is his daughter." "That's not true. He has evidence, Dorothy. Photos, financial records, even medical documentation. He's planning to file a paternity suit and demand custody of Grace." Milo's performance was flawless. The hurt husband, the protective father, the man betrayed by his wife and colleague. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. I don't understand. Why would Thomas do that? "Because he's been extorting money from our accounts to pay for your affair. Look at this." Milo showed me printed bank statements that appeared to document transfers to Thomas's personal account, photographic evidence of supposed secret meetings, even a recording of what sounded like my voice agreeing to meet Thomas at hotels. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated and damning. Anyone seeing it would believe I'd been conducting a systematic affair while stealing money to fund it. "Milo, none of this is real. I've never had an affair with Thomas. Those photos are fake." "Dorothy, I know this is hard to accept, but Thomas has confessed everything. He's even willing to take a paternity test to prove Grace is his daughter." "Paternity test?" "He claims you both planned this from the beginning, that you got pregnant deliberately to extort money from me, and now that Grace is born, you're planning to disappear with him and take everything." Milo's story was brilliant in its simplicity. Every piece of evidence we'd planned to use against him had been reframed to make us look like the criminals. "But here's what I don't understand, Dorothy. Thomas showed me something that doesn't make sense." Milo pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. It was Thomas's voice, clearly distressed. "Milo, I need to tell you the truth about Dorothy and Grace. We've been lying to you for months." "What kind of lies, Thomas?" "The affair, the pregnancy, everything. But it's not what you think. Dorothy doesn't know the whole truth either." I listened in horror as the recording continued, with Thomas appearing to confess to manipulating both Milo and me. But something about the audio quality seemed off. The conversations didn't flow naturally. "This recording is edited," I said. "Is it? Or are you just realizing that your partner in crime is trying to save himself by throwing you under the bus?" "Milo, I know about Bree. I know about the pregnancy, the hidden accounts, everything." For the first time, his mask slipped slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I know you've been planning this for months. The fake evidence, the financial fraud, the medical procedures. I know about advanced reproductive solutions and what you've been doing to women there. Milo's face went completely still. Dorothy, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. The stress of motherhood, discovering your affair partner is betraying you. It's affecting your judgment. I have recordings, Milo. I have evidence of everything you've done. No, you don't. Because nothing you're describing ever happened. What happened is that you had an affair, got pregnant with another man's child, and now you're having a psychotic break when confronted with the truth. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. I'm calling Dr. Stevens. You need immediate psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Stevens? The psychiatrist I've been consulting about your increasingly erratic behavior. The one who's been documenting your emotional instability since Grace was born. Another piece of his elaborate framework fell into place. He'd been building a case for my mental incompetence alongside everything else. But what Milo didn't know was that Thomas and Bree were already implementing our emergency protocol. While he was trying to gaslight me into submission, they were delivering evidence to authorities that would expose his entire criminal conspiracy. The trap he thought he was setting for me was about to spring shut on him instead. I just had to survive long enough for help to arrive. Dr. Stevens will be here in 20 minutes, Milo said, pocketing his phone. He's bringing medication that will help stabilize your delusions until we can get you proper treatment. You're going to have me committed. I'm going to get you help. Dorothy, you're clearly having a psychotic episode. These conspiracy theories about medical fraud and elaborate deceptions, they're symptoms of postpartum psychosis. The brilliance of his strategy became clear. Everything I said about his crimes would be dismissed as mental illness. Every piece of evidence I presented would be seen as the paranoid delusions of an unstable new mother. And while I'm getting help, what happens to Grace? Thomas has agreed to take responsibility for his daughter. It's the least he can do after destroying our marriage. Milo moved closer, his voice taking on a tone of manufactured compassion. Dorothy, I know this is hard to accept, but Grace isn't my daughter. The paternity test confirmed it. You had an affair, got pregnant, and your mind created this elaborate fantasy to cope with the guilt. I want to help you through this, he continued. Even after everything you've done, I still care about you. We can work through this together. How generous of you. The doctors say that with proper medication and therapy, you might be able to have supervised visits with Grace eventually. Once you accept reality and start taking responsibility for your actions. He was painting himself as the noble husband, forgiving and supportive despite being betrayed. The victim narrative was so complete that anyone watching would see him as a saint dealing with his mentally ill wife. What about Bree? Milo's expression didn't change, but I caught a flash of something in his eyes. I don't know what you mean. Your secretary. The one who's pregnant with your child. Dorothy, there is no pregnant secretary. These delusions are getting worse. Bree is a professional colleague, nothing more. The doorbell rang, and Milo moved toward the door with obvious relief. That'll be Dr. Stevens. But when he opened the door, it wasn't a psychiatrist standing there. It was Thomas, flanked by 2 police officers and a woman in a business suit I recognized as Attorney Rodriguez. Milo Martinez? One of the officers said. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of medical fraud, financial crimes, and conspiracy. Milo's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, anger, then calculating calm. Officers, I think there's been a mistake. My wife is having a psychiatric emergency, and I'm afraid her delusions have led to false accusations. Sir, we need you to step outside. Of course. But you should know that Dorothy is currently experiencing postpartum psychosis. Anything she's told you is the product of mental illness. I have documentation from her psychiatrist. Attorney Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Martinez, we have recordings of your conversations with Bree Thompson detailing your conspiracy. We have financial records showing payments to Advanced Reproductive Solutions for unauthorized medical procedures. And we have testimony from clinic staff about the systematic fraud you've been conducting. That's impossible. Those people are lying, probably paid by Thomas as part of his extortion scheme. Thomas spoke up for the first time. Milo, we have your own voice on recordings discussing Phase 2 and final extraction. We have bank records showing you transferred $50,000 to offshore accounts yesterday, and we have medical records proving you authorized procedures on Dorothy without her consent. Medical records can be falsified. Audio can be edited. You're presenting fabricated evidence created by people who are trying to frame me for their own crimes. One of the officers consulted his radio, then looked up with grim satisfaction. Sir, I need to inform you that Advanced Reproductive Solutions was raided 2 hours ago. Dr. Morrison is in custody, and he's provided detailed testimony about your partnership in conducting unauthorized fertility procedures. Milo's composure finally cracked. Morrison is lying to save himself. Whatever he's told you is fabricated to avoid prosecution for his own medical malpractice. He provided us with video surveillance from the clinic showing you bringing unconscious women in for procedures they never consented to. We have documentation of genetic material theft, unauthorized embryo creation, and systematic reproductive fraud spanning 2 years. That's not possible. Those records don't exist. They do now. Dr. Morrison kept detailed records of every procedure, including videos, as insurance against exactly this situation. Attorney Rodriguez added, Mr. Martinez, we also have evidence that you've been conducting this operation with multiple victims. 12 other women have come forward with similar stories of unauthorized procedures and manipulated pregnancies. Milo looked around desperately, his carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. His eyes settled on me with something approaching hatred. This is all Dorothy's fault. She seduced Thomas, got pregnant with his child, and when I discovered the affair, she created this elaborate conspiracy to destroy me. She's mentally ill, and she's manipulated all of you into believing her delusions. But even as he spoke, I could see that no one was buying his story anymore. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too corroborated by multiple sources. The man who had spent months manipulating everyone around him had finally run out of lies that anyone would believe. As the officers moved to arrest him, Milo made one last desperate play. Wait, you're making a terrible mistake. I have evidence that proves Dorothy and Thomas have been running an elaborate extortion scheme against me. He pulled out his phone frantically. I have recordings, photographs, financial documents that prove they've been stealing from me and planning to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. Sir, put the phone down and place your hands behind your back. No, you don't understand. Look at these photos. Look at this financial evidence. Dorothy has been systematically stealing money and conducting an affair with my employee. They got her pregnant deliberately to extort money from me. Attorney Rodriguez examined the phone Milo was waving. These are the AI-generated images and falsified records we've already identified, Mr. Martinez. We know you paid Digital Evidence Solutions $75,000 to create this fake documentation. That's impossible. Those payments were for legitimate business consulting. We have the invoices detailing exactly what services they provided. Custom photo manipulation, voice synthesis, and digital document creation for what your emails called evidence management in high-conflict divorce proceedings. Thomas stepped forward. Milo, it's over. We know about the vasectomy you got in January. We know you've been sterile for months, which means neither Grace nor Bree's baby could be yours naturally. That's not relevant. Dorothy had an affair regardless of my medical situation. We also know about the genetic material you stole from the company health screening. The fertility clinic has records showing you paid them to use my sperm to artificially inseminate Dorothy without her knowledge. I watched Milo's face as the full scope of his crimes was laid out in front of witnesses. The color drained from his skin as he realized there was no lie sophisticated enough to explain away this level of evidence. And we know, I said, speaking directly to him for the first time since the officers arrived, that you drugged me at the company retreat to perform the procedure. Janet from the clinic provided security footage showing you and Dr. Morrison bringing an unconscious woman into the facility on May 15th. You can't prove that woman was you. Actually, we can. The footage clearly shows you carrying me into the clinic while I was unconscious. We also have your credit card records showing you paid for emergency fertility intervention that night. Milo's carefully maintained facade finally shattered completely. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Bree was pregnant, Dorothy was getting suspicious, and I needed a way to protect myself legally. I couldn't let either of you destroy my career over personal relationships. So you decided to destroy us instead. I was trying to find a solution that would work for everyone. If Grace was Thomas's daughter, Dorothy could be with him, I could be with Bree, and everyone would be happy with their biological families. Except you stole my genetic material without consent, Thomas said. And you violated Dorothy's body without her knowledge. And you stole our money to pay for it, I added. Money that was supposed to be for Grace's future. Milo's voice became increasingly frantic. I was going to pay it back. Once the divorce was settled and I married Bree, I would have made sure everyone was compensated fairly. With what money? You were planning to disappear with everything. Sir, you need to come with us now, the officer said, producing handcuffs. You're under arrest for medical fraud, financial crimes, conspiracy, and sexual assault. Sexual assault? I never touched Dorothy inappropriately. Performing medical procedures on an unconscious woman without consent constitutes sexual assault under state law. As they cuffed him, Milo made one final attempt at manipulation. Dorothy, you know I love you. Everything I did was to try to save our marriage. These people are lying to you, turning you against me. Don't let them destroy our family. Our family? I stood up, holding Grace protectively. You mean the family? You built on stolen genetic material and forged documents? The family where you planned to have me committed to steal my daughter? Grace isn't even your biological daughter. She's Thomas's child, created from stolen genetic material. You have no legal right to her. Actually, Attorney Rodriguez interjected, under reproductive crime statutes, Dorothy is Grace's legal mother regardless of the circumstances of conception. The biological father's rights are void when the genetic material was obtained through criminal activity. And, Thomas added, I'm relinquishing any parental claims to Grace. She was created without my knowledge or consent, and Dorothy is the only parent she's ever known. Milo stared at us in disbelief. You're all insane. You're destroying an innocent child's future because of your vendetta against me. No, I said quietly. We're protecting an innocent child from a man who sees her as a piece of evidence in his criminal conspiracy. As the officers led Milo toward their patrol car, he called back desperately. What about Bree? What about our son? You can't take my son away from me. Your son? One of the officers paused. Sir, according to the medical records, the child Ms. Thompson is carrying was created using genetic material from a donor who specifically requested anonymity. You have no legal claim to that child either. The look of absolute devastation on Milo's face as he realized he'd lost everything. His wife, his children, his freedom, his future, might have generated sympathy if I hadn't known the scope of what he'd done to earn it. As the patrol car pulled away, I found myself standing in my driveway, holding Grace, surrounded by the people who'd helped me reclaim my life from a man who'd tried to steal everything that mattered. The nightmare was finally over, but the healing was just beginning. As the police cars disappeared down our street, I found myself sitting on my front steps, Grace sleeping peacefully in my arms, trying to process what had just happened. Thomas sat beside me while Attorney Rodriguez made calls to coordinate the next steps of the legal process. Is it really over? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The criminal part is just beginning, Rodriguez said, ending her call. But Dorothy, you're safe now. The emergency protective orders have frozen all of Milo's assets, including the offshore accounts. Every penny he stole will be recovered. What? About the other women? The 12 victims you mentioned? They're all coming forward now. Once word spread about Milo's arrest, women who'd been suffering in silence realized they weren't alone. Some have children who were conceived the same way Grace was. Others were still undergoing the fertility treatments when we shut down the clinic. Thomas looked shell-shocked. How many lives did he destroy? We're still uncovering the full scope, but between the reproductive crimes, financial fraud, and identity theft, Milo could be facing 40 years in federal prison. Rodriguez's phone rang again. After a brief conversation, she turned to us with grim satisfaction. Advanced Reproductive Solutions has been permanently shut down. Dr. Morrison is cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's providing evidence about similar operations in 3 other states. There are more clinics? Milo wasn't the only person running this kind of scheme. It appears there's been a network of men using corrupt fertility clinics to manipulate women's pregnancies for legal and financial advantage. The FBI is opening a multi-state investigation. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. What I'd thought was a personal betrayal had actually been part of a systematic exploitation of women's reproductive rights. What happens to the children? All these babies who were conceived through criminal activity? They remain with their mothers. The law is clear that children born through reproductive crimes belong to the women who carried and birthed them, regardless of how conception occurred. Over the next hour, Rodriguez walked us through the financial implications of Milo's arrest. The hidden accounts, the stolen money, the elaborate asset protection schemes, all of it would be unwound and returned to the victims. Dorothy, you'll recover not only what Milo stole from your joint accounts, but you'll also receive compensation from the Criminal Victims Fund. Additionally, you have grounds for a substantial civil lawsuit against both Milo and the clinic. I don't want his money. I just want him to never be able to hurt anyone else. The criminal conviction will ensure that. But the financial recovery will give you and Grace security for the future. You'll never have to worry about supporting her or paying for the therapy you'll both need to process this trauma. Thomas, who had been quiet through most of the legal discussions, finally spoke. Up. What about me? What are my responsibilities to Grace? Legally, you have none. The genetic material was stolen from you without consent. However, if you choose to be part of Grace's life in some capacity, that would be entirely up to you and Dorothy to arrange privately. By evening, news vans had arrived on our street. The story of the reproductive fraud ring was spreading rapidly, and our case was becoming the centerpiece of a national conversation about fertility crime and women's rights. You don't have to talk to them, Rodriguez advised as reporters gathered outside our house. But if you choose to, your story could help other women recognize if they're being victimized. I thought about all the women who might be living with doubts, inconsistencies, and manipulations they couldn't quite explain. Women like I had been just days ago, trusting their partners while being systematically violated. I'll talk to them, but not today. Today, I just want to hold my daughter and remember that she's safe. That night, I put Grace to bed in the nursery that Milo had grudgingly helped prepare, but which now felt truly ours for the first time. As I watched her sleep, I realized that despite the horrific circumstances of her conception, she was completely innocent and completely mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Bree. Thank you for saving us both. My son was born this afternoon. He's healthy and beautiful, and he'll grow up knowing his mother fought for his future. Another text, this one from Thomas. I'll always be grateful that something beautiful came from something so terrible. Grace is lucky to have you as her mother. And, finally, one from attorney Rodriguez. Milo's bail was denied. He won't be getting out anytime soon. You can sleep peacefully tonight. As I settled into bed alone for the first time in 4 years, without wondering what lies my husband was telling, what money he was stealing, or what violations he was planning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Grace was mine. Our future was secure. And the man who had tried to destroy us would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with the same systematic precision that Milo had used to try to destroy us. The predator had become the prey, and his victims had become the victors. Sitting in the garden of our new home, watching Grace take her first wobbly steps across the soft grass, I reflect on how completely our lives have transformed. The house Milo and I shared has been sold, the proceeds added to the restitution fund for his other victims. This place, bright, peaceful, truly ours, represents the fresh start I never thought possible. Grace giggles as she tumbles into my arms, her dark eyes sparkling with joy. She'll never remember the trauma surrounding her birth, but she'll grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, and fiercely loved by the mother who fought for her future. The trial concluded 3 months ago. Milo received 42 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Dr. Morrison got 15 years and permanent revocation of his medical license. The broader investigation led to arrests in 6 states and the shutdown of a nationwide reproductive trafficking network. Bree and I have become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience and our children's unique connection. Her son, Kurt, is a happy, healthy toddler who plays with Grace at our weekly coffee meetings. She named him after her grandfather, a strong name for a child who represents triumph over terrible circumstances. Therapy has been essential for processing the trauma of reproductive assault and systematic manipulation. Dr. Rebecca Hart, my counselor, helped me understand that healing isn't about forgetting what happened, but about reclaiming agency over my life and future. "You survived something that would have destroyed many people," she told me during our first session. "Your strength isn't just in surviving, it's in fighting back and protecting your child." Thomas has become a cherished friend and honorary uncle to Grace. He chose not to pursue any legal relationship with her, but he sends birthday cards and Christmas gifts, and Grace knows him as Uncle Thomas, who helped Mommy when she needed it most. It's an arrangement that works for all of us. The financial settlement was substantial enough that I'll never have to worry about Grace's education or our security. More importantly, the victim advocacy work I've taken on gives me purpose beyond my own recovery. I now work with Rodriguez's law firm, helping other women identify and prosecute reproductive crimes. The patterns are always similar: gradual isolation, financial manipulation, medical procedures that don't quite make sense, and men who seem too good to be true. Last month, I helped a woman named Edith discover that her husband had been using donor sperm for their fertility treatments, while telling her the children were biologically his. The month before, I worked with investigators to expose a clinic in Texas that was performing unauthorized genetic modifications on embryos. The work is difficult, but deeply meaningful. Every woman we help, every criminal we expose, every clinic we shut down represents another victory against people who prey on women's trust and biology. As Grace grows, I'll tell her the truth about her origins in age-appropriate ways. She'll know that she was conceived through criminal activity, but that she is not defined by those crimes. She'll understand that her existence led to justice for many women and protection for future victims. More importantly, she'll know that her mother fought for her from the moment she was born. That when powerful people tried to use her as a weapon against her mother turned her into a shield to protect others. The morning sun filters through our garden, casting gentle shadows as Grace toddles toward her favorite butterfly, Bush. Her laughter fills the air with pure joy, untainted by the darkness that surrounded her beginning. I think about the woman I was a year ago, broken, confused, isolated, and afraid. She couldn't have imagined this life, this peace, this strength. But she survived long enough to become the woman sitting here today, watching her daughter explore a world made safer by their combined courage. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most powerful transformations. Grace and I are living proof that even the darkest manipulations can't extinguish the light of truth, love, and justice. Our story began with a man's attempt to erase us from our own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.